Hi, I'm here with Gillian Kenny, Dr. Gillian Kenny again. This is part of our playlist where we're looking at generally medieval Ireland and women in medieval Ireland and all sorts of quite complex topics that Gillian has taught for us at the Irish Pagan schools. So today we're going to be talking about the lost world of Gaelic Ireland, which is a course that Gillian has at the Irish Pagan School, but it is a very poignant topic and for Irish people, obviously, but also for the diaspora. And it's something that a lot of people really connect in with. So, Gillian, welcome.
Thank you,
Um,
Laura.
what do you feel are the most significant cultural aspects that we lost to colonisation, and how might we as a community work to reconnect with them? So we'll start with the what we've lost.
Sure. So I think there are losses that are both tangible and intangible when we talk about the loss of Gaelic Ireland. So in terms of tangible losses, of course, the great one was the language,
Mm.
which was lost not from the 17th century on, but really from the catastrophe of things like the famine. But the process started a long time before. We lost much of the literature. We had a kind of a specific educated class who would produce really well, varying qualities, but certainly a lot of extremely high quality poetry, which we lost. We've lost many of our source material for Gaelic Ireland. It can be very patchy. Partly because, of course, of the wars that raged against Ireland across Ireland in the 16th and 17th centuries, in which the Gaelic world was kind of razed to the ground.
Mm.
So there are tangible kind of things which I guess as a historian I wish we had and we could look back on and consult and gain more of an idea of what the society was like. We still do have a lot of really good material though. We have the body of laws, still have a fair amount of poetry, and we have various other manuscripts which cover lots of different things from kind of cosmology to medicine and things like that. So we also use archaeology to reconstruct this kind of lost world. So they're tangible. I think in terms of intangible losses, the loss of a culture is a massive psychic shock. I think to a nation. Gaelic Ireland itself was an ancient and very sophisticated, very complex society. It was by no means perfect, but it very much kind of had its place in the world. Its society was highly regulated, highly organized. I think it's important to bear it in mind when you look at as you do even today ideas about Irish people, disorganized, and especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and kind of chaotic. And that's not actually the way
Mm.
it was. If you look back to what we know about early and medieval Ireland, it's quite highly regimented. It's quite socially conservative. It also has a learned class of lawyers who wrote probably the most comprehensive set of legal records of its time in the Western world. So these people wrote laws that covered things like cats and beekeeping, to grades of society, to the type of food you could eat, to your social status, to things like it covered things like what you would do if someone wronged you, that you could go and fast against them, for example. There are about 10 distinct types of sexual relationship, often called marriage, in which people could engage in, so ranging from a wife of equal status down to basically one night stands, which were
Mm.
covered in the law. It has things like alimony payments. It has things like children aren't considered illegitimate if the parents aren't married in the church.
Mm.
So in some ways, it was very aware. It was a system that's very aware of how people live their lives.
Mm.
It circumscribed them, of course it did, because it's a legal system, but it sought to accommodate the various rainbow of how people kind of lived.
It was
It's
a
also a world.
bottom up
It was a
rather than a
bottom
top
up.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this
So
is
it's yeah,
the Brehon law system, just for anybody who's not familiar with it. That's
yeah.
what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's also unique in another way, because Ireland, despite in the like for a very long time being split into little kingdoms, which became little lordships. So there were hundreds of them, and on that system, you know, it is a triangular system. You've got kind of regional kings, you've got kind of over kings. But within that system, no matter how fragmented it was, there is a single legal code which everyone adhered to. Now, there are slightly different interpretations, but it is the code. There is a class of intellectuals, historians, judges, poets who freely travelled everywhere and were welcome. It was a society based on hospitality, on making sure that this intellectual elite was well looked after. And they all spoke the same language. And that spread as part of what was called the Gaeltacht from Ireland right into Western Scotland. So it's part of a kind of a really thriving kind of cross-channel, vibrant community, which was lost, which was wiped out to all intents and purposes in the 16th and 17th century. So I think personally, and I know there's been some psychological work done on this kind of effect, I think the trauma of this, which took a couple of hundred years to actually enforce, the starvation, the genocide, the wiping out of a way of life, the new laws brought in by kind of English overlords to ban the speaking of Irish, the wearing of Irish clothes, the wearing of Irish haircuts. This has had a profound impact on the Irish psyche. I mean, I know people talk about post-colonialism, and it is part of that, of course, that whole process. But I think that is an intangible effect that, to a certain extent, we are still working through and have been until quite recently. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, we can't talk about this without making the very valid point that there is a part of Ireland that is still colonized. So, when we're talking about post-colonialism, this is not something that is in the past. There are people who grew up in the north of Ireland in the 60s and 70s who weren't allowed to speak Irish, who weren't allowed, who were prosecuted for being Catholics. And to a certain extent, some of that is still happening currently, even past the Good Friday Agreement and everything. And it's an ongoing trauma. It's an ongoing wound. It's an open wound. And I've often said, like, I really don't think that Irish people even are in a place yet where we can, like, mass recognize this, as an ongoing trauma or as an open wound, because we're not past it. We haven't had a chance to heal. Now there are aspects of it, obviously, that aren't happening across the island anymore. Like, and it was definitely worse back then. But it's something that, like the second part to that question, how might we as a community work to reconnect them? Like, there's been fantastic stuff, even in my lifetime, with the Irish language, and just because that was your first point, like, I want to, we were in college one evening, and a secondary school teacher who was doing the masters with us referred to Irish as a dead language, and it's still so ingrained in our psyche. There is trauma there that causes us to dismiss, diminish, just shy away from anything to do with the language. We're embarrassed, we have shame, and this is ancestral trauma, I firmly believe. There has been a lot of studies where looking at basically intergenerational DNA and the children of people who grew up in wars, and actually some of the research was done in the north of Ireland, actually, and the children of people who grew up in war zones still have the same trauma effects on their DNA, even though they weren't directly affected by it. So this is scientifically something that is passed down through generations, and the Irish language, I think, is the clearest example of it. The Irish connection, or lack thereof, of connection to our own language, and to being able to deal with these, or be aware of them for a start, but deal with these feelings that rise up, and when we hear it, when we try and speak it, of guilt and shame, that is still so ingrained. I feel it, and I've been an advocate for Irish my entire life, and myself and John were out in a cafe one time, and we do this thing where we try and speak it, like as we're out and about going through our days, we'd have sessions, as we call them, and the serving person came over and like caught us speaking Irish, and I had such a visceral reaction to it, to being caught speaking Irish, and I was like, where the hell did that come from? That wasn't mine, But when you look back through the generations, you see where even parents, we got to the point, and that's part of the colonial process, we got to the point where parents were punishing their own children for speaking their own language, even if they didn't speak English themselves,
As a means of improving their children.
Exactly, yeah.
Because you have to speak English, because you'll get a
Because,
job.
yeah,
And also you can emigrate. If you speak English,
yeah,
you can get out.
yeah,
Because Ireland was often seen as, I mean, a terrible place to live, and often quite rightly, because of what was happening here
yeah,
in terms of deprivation and poverty. Yeah, I agree. I think the last while has been interesting. I think the more prosperous Ireland gets, I'm interested to see how that affects that kind of post-colonialism. I think inadvertently, unconsciously, Irish people often compare themselves to England, in that how are we doing in terms of. I wonder if that's still the kind of the standard meter. I see in my children, particularly, they don't seem to have that. They seem very
Mine wouldn't either. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so they seem very secure in the Irishness. In kind of kids' terms, it seems quite cool to be Irish.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that will play out. I hope we're kind of the last generation who's ever had to do it. And I agree with you. I mean, there's, when I was growing up and learning Irish, it was always seen as kind of cringe and a bit of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Because
And there
that's
was
not where
a classism to it as well. Did you, we, I grew up just outside Ballymun, and went to school with the children from the flats and all that, and we could never afford going to the Gaeltacht for summers or anything like that. It just wasn't in our remit. But we weren't quite poor enough for the scholarships either. So
you're in the middle zone, the dreaded middle zone.
Lower middle, kind of upper working class, and it was just this, only the posh kids were able to go to the Irish colleges or go to, or get the grinds to do honours Irish, and all of this. And there was definitely a classism to it, which I think it's interesting that you brought up the prosperity, because it definitely is. I know people who send their kids to Gael schools because it's the higher class, it's the better caliber of person goes to a Gael school,
Yeah.
So it's interesting watching that then, how that's going to develop, as you say. But again, there's a lot of grassroots stuff, even in the last 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of grassroots stuff. There's pop-up Gael talk. Looking back, right, I absolutely will credit Des Bishop learning Irish.
Oh yeah, he learned Irish, didn't he?
For
I remember
anybody,
that,
for anybody who was around at the time, or I'm sure you can look it up on YouTube as well. The American Irish comedian Des Bishop was living here for a while, and he did a whole TV show, didn't he, about learning Irish? And
yeah, what did he call it? In the Name of the Fada? Was that
In the
was
Name
that
of the
what
Fada,
was
that was
called?
it. FADA, yeah. And honestly, looking back in my life, that's the first time I remember that kind of dawn that Irish might actually be cool. Why would somebody outside?
But it took an outsider to tell you.
Yeah. And that's part of the trauma as
American.
well, that is part of the trauma.
It had to be sanctioned by a representative of, what was then the greatest Western power.
Which is fucking horrible. It makes me cringe just thinking about it. But
well, it was the way. It's the way for all of us. It was the way. But Laura, crucially, I think as well, in terms of the teaching of the Irish language and the attitude of Irish language purists. Now, when I was growing up, it was really prohibitive. You had to speak Irish in a certain way and had to be beautiful Irish. And I think that's relaxed more recently, because I do see more of it. Just try it, and if you use English words in it, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
And that's a more healthy way of doing it. That's way more encouraging. If you can't remember the English for a mortgage payment, put it in. If you can't remember the Irish, put it in English. It doesn't matter, because we can be bilingual. You
Mm.
can switch.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I think you're right. It is trauma. And it is difficult. Look, I've been reading a book recently on excavations up in, just talking about trauma and DNA, excavations on Donegal,
Mm.
just talking about the north, well, Ulster. And it's showing that deprivation, extreme deprivation, has been endemic, was endemic up there for like hundreds of years,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's got to, and then, that was ripped apart
Mm.
in the 17th century, and even more deprivation
Yeah.
came in. So it's got to have an effect. It's got
Absolutely.
to be
Yeah.
there in your bones,
Yeah.
that you know what hunger's like, you never want to go there again. And that pushes you towards, okay, I'll learn English. If I do have to do what
Mhm.
I need to do to stop this, then that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
And a country changes, a culture disappears,
Absolutely.
unfortunately.
And I suppose just to come back to the second part of that, like how might we as a community work to reconnect with them? I've just come out of a master's, and this is literally what I was studying, the development of Ogham, or the place of Ogham in the development of Irish identity through the Gaelic revival and the revolution, and on into the Free State and everything. So
Mm.
there was a lot of stuff that was really striking clear to me, and actually clarified a lot of my kind of mission with the Irish Pagan School as well. Because the one thing that was really striking me, say with the work of like Douglas Hyde and Owen MacNeill, particularly, I was looking at, and because obviously he was an Ogham academic, and then a huge part of the revolutionary movement as well. Was born in the north, learned Irish, made it his life mission, to reintegrate and redevelop the Irish identity. And just ran the gauntlet. Just for anybody who's not familiar with him, he was involved in every aspect of that, and really became a bit of a hero for me, I have to say. Um, Going from, he never really kind of had featured in my awareness of the revolutionary period before. He kind of got a little bit subsumed. Um, but all of that being said, one of the main things that they did through that was to make what was, in the academy, the scholarship, the academic, was to really try and bring that to the common people. There was meetings, there was clubs, there was, whether it was Irish language or culture and traditions. And of course, I was specifically interested in, say, the older, the Gaelic Irish, with the Ogham particularly, but the Ogham then as a I suppose a symbolic representation of our great and glorious past, which again is destroyed as part of the uncivilized barbarian Irish kind of mindset that they're speaking the barbaric tongue and all this. And there was such a re-envisioning of that. And I also came across a lot where, like, they were looking to the Druidic past, say. Now it was very romanticized, obviously. Like, there was there was a lot that they got wrong, let's put it that way, right? But even with that, like, I did wonder, was this, it wasn't Catholic, it wasn't Protestant, it was pagan. So it kind of crossed that divide, between the Protestant academy, or the mostly Protestant academy, with the kind of the average Irish Catholic person, the lay person. Um, and it's just like, there's so much there that we can look at and say, well, how did they do that? Like, they literally caused a whole revolution, They overthrew. Now, again, I'm not perfect, but it was a whole movement. And that's really what I wanted to kind of, like, those unformed thoughts or unclarified thoughts were what actually led me to start the Irish Pagan School, to try and make that, and to write my first book back in the early 2000s, to make that kind of scholarship accessible. And, having gone through the formal academic side of it now, where I never had that before, I'm even more interested and invested in that idea of that kind of accessible, authentic connection to, to our history, to our heritage, to our folklore. So, Gillian, that's like an amazing part of what you bring to the Irish Pagan School. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
Very much. I mean, I really appreciate the chance to kind of reach out to people with this stuff, and even just develop their interest in it. And I know, it's a wide body of people who access it, and perhaps notions of Irishness have not always accorded with what it is in reality. Because, what you were talking about there, I always think about that time when we're rediscovering what they were calling Celtic Ireland.
Mm.
We're rediscovering that, and then it sort of takes a wrong turn in
Yeah.
the sense that, you know, it becomes kind of Catholic nationalism. It becomes, you have to be Catholic to be Irish, you have to be married to be Irish, you have to be producing children to be Irish.
Fuck you, Eamon De
And
Valera.
fuck you, Eamon De Valera is right. But I think I think what's happening now is, particularly in recent years with kind of the social changes, we are making room within Irishness for as many different types of Irishness
Absolutely,
as there
yeah.
are people to have it.
Mm.
So I think that's probably what was intended, certainly more academically, but we did unfortunately take a bit of a theocratic wrong turn.
Yeah.
But hopefully we're pushing that back now.
Yeah. So we can scrap Pierce and Dev, and I mean, Pierce was pretty militant about like what he was bringing to it, but he had that whole blood and soil thing, and you know, everybody has to
I think
sacrifice
Pierce was
themselves.
hiding from his nature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was the manliest of men.
Indeed. I think, yeah, I mean, again, you know, it's the complexity of the people involved in it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's you're right, and it must have been a very fascinating period to focus on, because it is the re-emerging, really, of a strong sense of Irishness, of being distinct, of having your own language, your own way of being, which was as valid as the English way.
Absolutely,
you
yeah.
know.
Absolutely.
So I think, and it's navigating, of course, at a time when, you know, there is Protestant versus Catholic. They're very different experiences of life. It was very difficult to, I guess, to synthesize that, and that might be the work that's for the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, in a changed Ireland, that might be the work that needs to be done to redefine Irishness. So it's not very hemmed in.
No.
In that sense, it's authentic, but it's about being more inclusive to people who might previously have felt, I don't actually think I'm Irish. Well, maybe you are.
Maybe.
You know, maybe
exactly.
there's room.
If you're living here, maybe you are. And I think we're really kind of coming up against that with, you know, with recent events in Ireland and the pollution of far right ideology coming in, you know, like not that it was completely absent here ever, I think, but there's definitely been a rise of it through Europe, through Britain, through America. And of course, there is a certain element of Irish society that's going to be, it's not just working class people. I've heard a lot of say, oh, this is the ignorant poor.
Yeah.
That's not what's fucking happening at all. There are very, very sophisticated plans in place and strategies. Don't want to get too conspiracy theories, but you know, we've seen it happen in other countries, and there's a lot that has been uncovered, you know, of Ireland being a particular target for a certain Christian mindset. That whole, you know, purity, and that kind of encased in amber, untouched, you know, notions of what Irishness, just to bring it back to what you were talking about, you know, what Irishness should be. And we're, you know, us uncouth Irish are taking it in a completely different direction, you know, where we're opening our doors to foreign nationals, and how very dare we, and the gays, and you know, trans
we
rights,
love the gays,
and
the more gays the better.
Can we get trans foreign national gays, please?
Everyone, just come on over.
Absolutely.
It's a so I think Melda May has written this poem and said you can't be racist in Irish.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing, isn't it? The idea. And I mean, I understand what she means. If you have any conception of Irish history, it is literally impossible for you to turn your back on people who come here, because that is all we did for hundreds of years around the globe. And our history is one of immigration into here, colonization, of marrying your overlord and having babies for him, and then the next generation are bits of both. It is far too complex to be reduced to Conor McGregor saying he's going to beat people up because they're orange men. This is a ridiculous state of affairs to be in. And I agree with you. We are seen to be a target. All the the bad forces are looking at us now. But I think, you know what, Laura, if it comes to it, you're going to have people like me on the streets punching Nazis.
Absolutely.
That's I will not lie down and let this happen. It will not
Absolutely.
happen. We cannot let this country become that.
Absolutely.
That is not what we are. Well, okay, of course we are, but we have to fight against it
Absolutely.
tooth
Yeah.
and
That's it.
nail. That can't be
That's
allowed to
it.
happen.
That's it. We always seem to end up back here, Gillian. Sometimes on camera, sometimes on off. I love it.
I just,
I love it.
I'm not very good at punching. I could probably throw a book at a Nazi. That's probably fine.
Throw a book at a Nazi today.
I can throw a book at a Nazi. I can throw Owen McNeill's books at
There you go.
Nazis.
There you go. Yeah, and like I love the way like people like Imelda May are standing up and using the media, and people like us using social media as we're doing right now to make this history more accessible. And I really hope that we continue that mission with the Irish Pagan School and through your own work and your lectures outside of our spaces, definitely as well. But we're delighted to have you with us, Gillian. And if anybody is interested in more classes, there's a link to all of Gillian's classes, including The Lost World of Gaelic Ireland, because it's really important to understand and, disabuse yourself of the notions of Irishness and actually see what we had, what was lost, and bring it all back in our
Actually,
modern
can I just jump
communities.
in?
Yeah, of course.
Can I just jump in, Laura, and tell you that just as you were saying that, one of the central kind of tenets of Gaelic Irish society was hospitality and protection, legal protection for foreigners. That was a central core element. They might not be very high legal protections in all times, but you had them. If you married a foreigner, they would. So that is essentially part of who we are.
It is
and
our
that is
literal
something that we
history.
should never lose. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these people out protesting immigration and all of that and waving the Irish flag need to fucking stop. So
or I'll throw an Owen McNeill book at them.
There you go. You heard it here first.
That's my threat.
When we're reporting on an esteemed academic who's
I don't care, man. I'll do whatever it takes to stop them. I swear to God, they're not coming in here. No way. I'm so anti it because I lived in the UK and I've seen what's happened over there, and it's poison.
Yeah.
Poison.
Absolutely.
And we can't. We've spent 400 years going around the rest of the world going, Ireland's a shithole. Can you take us in? And people have gone, there you go.
Yeah.
We can't do it now. We just can't.
But it's this lovely
and we've
white
got money
skin,
and
you
we've got
see.
space.
This lovely white skin that we have, and that's the difference, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, unfortunately.
And we really saw it with the differing reactions to, Ukrainian refugees coming in and the other refugees. So this is the kind of shit we need to stop. Absolutely stop.
Listen, the best part of us, I think, is stuff like, and I completely get what you say. I mean, there's no doubt there's vast levels of racism, and people have had as their lived experience every day, unfortunately. Well, we need to get more in contact with the type of Irish person who goes, actually, Israel, that's not right, what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of Irishness that we need, because, even at the upper levels, I don't have much truck with politicians, but what they're saying is correct.
Yeah.
And we understand the rage, but that's not going to solve it. And that's the type of inner Irishness we need to get more in contact with. We need to go, do you know what? Yeah, of course you're welcome. Come on in, get a job, sort yourself out. That's all anyone wants.
Be sound. As Kirsten said on the Rose of Tralee, just be sound.
Simple. That's all you need. Might call my next book that.
Just be sound, yeah. Brilliant.
The history of Ireland, just be sound.
Brilliant. Okay, Gillian, we leave it there. Make sure and check out the links below, and we will see you on the rest of the playlist, which will be appearing somewhere on your screen here. And make sure to check it all out. Okay, Slán.